Ooh, Big Thunder.
Oh yeah,
Woo.
really? You did some
Yeah.
of that over the weekend. Okay. What am I looking for here? Okay. Oh yeah, this guy. Oh, we're live. I didn't. You popped on and it went live.
Nice.
That's awesome. I did
Here we
was not aware
are.
of that. Hey everybody. That's hilarious. Just a little behind the curtain. Not that there's anybody watching it, but we can edit the show part, obviously.
Right.
All right. Well, I may just do a quick intro and then kick it over to you to sort of just intro the topic and everything.
Sure.
What changed with your mic? You got a little quieter.
I didn't do anything.
Huh. I wonder if that just happens when it starts recording. And you know what? It sounds fine after too when I've listened to it back. So no prob. All right. Let me make sure I got the. Okay. Give a little break here and then we'll do the actual intro. I think Anne found us. We have one viewer.
One viewer.
One.
Woohoo.
Welcome, whoever you are. Probably Anne. All right. Welcome back to another episode of the Free Flow CEO Show. Great to be with you. I'm Matt Dowd, your host, alongside my esteemed colleague and co-host, Jonathan Shealy of Shealy Consulting. And we're doing this series called Built to Lead, where we're investigating sort of the hidden hangups that entrepreneurs, founders, business owners that we run into, trying to lead our businesses, lead our companies, lead our teams forward in successful ways, and to what we're trying to do is uncover those things that prevent that from happening. So, Jonathan, you brought up today's topic. Why don't I just kick it over to you and introduce what it is we're talking about today and where we're going to go with it?
Yeah, thanks. Um, I was having a conversation with someone recently, a prospective client, and we were talking about the old school need to know culture and got down into the weeds on communication and patterns of information flow. And there's a lot of like theoretical exercise in the topic, but there's also some practicals to it too, which I think would be applicable to what the community is built for. Taking a theory, put it into practice. Um, the history behind communication theory is really interesting. You know, you can find a lot of people in the higher ed world that study communication because it's fascinating and it's tangent to people study. But for business builders, it it has some teeth to it. If you do it well, you can really build some positive culture. But if you don't, it can really undermine things.
Gotcha. Okay. And so we're wanting to look at what, like, how that used to play and like what's shifted or like what's better.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I think that's a good way of saying it. You know, there's ways that maybe old school business was required to function a certain way because of its technological limitations.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So information flow today in today's world is a lot easier for leaders because you can get things to people quicker.
Okay.
And so now the question is, what needs to be said? What's the wrong thing to say? What's
Yeah.
the right things to say? Um, and even like defining some terms on the difference between what you and I have talked about before, which is integrity or honesty as table stakes,
Yeah.
people versus what's authenticity and transparency. These are they're related terms, but boy, do they have different impacts in how leaders
Right.
work in their teams.
So to sort of frame this up, like old school, one end of the spectrum was we're we're just only going to tell you like disseminate information down through the organization that you absolutely need, and otherwise we're behind the curtain, right? And
Right.
you as a manager, director, an employee level person in the business is just going to function off what you essentially need to know and nothing else. So basically zero transparency, except where absolutely necessary, right?
Right.
And then the other
Right.
end of the spectrum being completely open door policy, where not just business wise, but even into like personal stuff. Is that kind of what we're talking about? Like just
Yeah,
too much
you
information?
right, you take the concept of let's make sure that people have the right information for their job, where we're no longer protecting information from like an authoritarian perspective, but then the boundaries get moved out even further into unhelpful pieces of information that actually could pro they may inhibit your
Hmm.
effectiveness as a leader and as a team.
And like, give an example. Like, what are we talking about?
All right, so I used the example the other day. So I would tell people, I tell my clients right now and my partners that my wife is pregnant. Okay, so my wife being pregnant
Yay.
is a
Yeah.
relevant piece of information for my clients, for my partners, even technically for my prospects, if you want to say it that way, for people who haven't yet partnered with
Sure.
me,
Yeah.
um, because that means that everyone knows what it means for a family to go through pregnancy. That means that at any time I could be offline for a week or two,
Yeah.
and
You're not even
and
sure of the
maybe
due
I would
date,
have a
right?
chance to
Like when.
communicate. Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe I would have a chance to communicate, maybe I won't. So that's a
Uh-huh.
relevant piece of information to share about my personal life. That's a good thing for people to know about me.
Right.
On the flip side, if I started to, go into very detailed, uh, you know, extremes into what's going on in the pregnancy,
Yeah.
or what stage we're at and what the OB said last time we talked and all, like that is just,
Yeah.
that's oversharing. That is not helpful pieces of information to the majority of a team. Now, if I have a team of partners and contractors that I work with, okay, they may be personally interested in those details, but they can ask my wife because they know my wife. They don't have to ask me about it, and it's not relevant for them to be successful in their job.
Right.
It's not that the information is wrong or immoral, it's just not helpful. And so if I were to lead my next team meeting talking about that stuff,
Mm-hmm.
it takes time away from the things that need to be talked about. It's not that it's wrong, it's just not helpful. And so the culture used to be no information of any kind. Then the pendulum swung all the way to the other side, which is all information of all kinds at all time. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm advocating for like a no, let's take that pendulum in the middle. Okay. Let's
Yeah.
talk about lots of information needs to be shared, but when is it appropriate and what versions are just not necessary?
Okay. Totally. Yeah, there's the TMI, too, personal information, like oversharing. What about just within the context of the business itself? Is there kind of a continuum or like a spectrum of, we want teams to be engaged with like goals, targets,
Mm.
aspirations, all that kind of stuff. But then there's a managerial layer, right? Where there are some things that not everybody needs to know. How would we go about, sort of framing that up or creating guidelines for what to share, even just as it pertains to the business?
Yeah, I think it's a relevant way of like moving forward in the conversation because we could talk about the extremes of things that are inappropriate, but if you want to talk about effectively leading your team,
Mm-hmm.
you're not talking about the extremes. You're talking about the day-to-day action, right? And so um, the example might be for my business model, I teach my clients and I want my people to regularly share their vision with their team. But the vision may have multiple copies, if you want to say it that way. So you have a version that your ownership group, if there's more than one owner in the company, the ownership group or the leadership 5, 7, whatever it is,
Uh-huh.
the top leaders, they have more detail to that
Right.
vision.
Yeah.
And I teach people to craft their vision in the you write it in the present tense with as much detail as is necessary. Um, one author calls it a vivid vision.
Mm-hmm.
Some people call it a compelling vision. Uh, but the thing is that not that whole picture may be only helpful to the people who have a stake in making that happen. So you only give part of the vision to the people who need it at a time, because really what you're trying to communicate to the people who are listening to you, if you're a line level worker or a middle manager, that there
Mm-hmm.
is a vision, that there is a tool that we're using as a leadership team to make decisions with. They want to know that as much as they want to know anything else. And so it's valuable to them to know that there is a vision and that this is where their part of it is, especially through that short-term plan. So if we're using this example of sharing the long-term game plan for your team, the most relevant way to share that long-term plan is to tell them what the short-term plan is today in context with the long term. So if you and I've talked about this before with Donald Miller's formula for a mission statement, which is economic goals, time, and a purpose. That
Mm-hmm.
purpose clause at the end of the mission statement is a great way of sharing the vision, right? So like this is why and what we're doing, and this is when we're going to get it accomplished, and this is the milestones that we're supposed to do. That conversation frames a great piece of communication for your whole team. But if you sit around and you start articulating the entire platform for your vision with your entire team, chances are people are going to argue with you. People are going to dissent from what that is. And that's not the platform to have that conversation, right? So
Mm.
you want to have the listening versions of the conversation not in the all hands session where it should be presentation, right? But
Yeah.
you want to give them something that's energetic, something that's including them in the plan. So you give them the partial picture that's the only enough that gets them working through what they want to see as energizing for their role. Connect it to their day, but don't go further than that, because not all the employees want to know the next 10 years.
Well, yeah, yeah. And not even maybe not even the next 10 years, but just so here's what I'm thinking about. My wife works for a big, national huge corporation that everybody knows. And it's like she periodically gets things handed down to her like the new initiative. Like this is what we're doing. She was not involved in planning it or deciding about it at all, right? Which, would be impossible for obviously there's a leadership team and stuff that needs to decide these things, but then it's this fine line because then it's as she's a pretty high level manager, um, and she still wasn't involved in the decision, so she just gets given to her for her to execute, and distribute to her whole team. And it's like buy-in is essentially just assumed slash required. No matter how good or bad this idea is at implementation level, right? where she's kind of at the top of that mini pyramid of implementation to the team that's boots on the ground, right? So it's like, how do you? I think this is going to make a difference depending on the size of the organization, because a company with 10 people is different than a company with 10,000 people, obviously. But like, how do you get people's buy-in and get input from the team, even at like every level of the organization, that makes them feel like they're part of it, but without like having the whole too many cooks in the kitchen syndrome happen?
I think this is where you got to ask people for their feedback in formats that don't compromise the leadership authority. All right. So like,
Right.
so what did the old school get right? The old school got right that if there were too many cooks in the kitchen, that
Going
nothing would get
nowhere.
done.
Yeah,
Right.
right.
So that's really where you're headed
Your
with that
soup won't
question.
taste very good.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
So what you have to do is you have to provide these more modern options for communication feedback that allow the leaders to make an informed plan. So this is where you do have a town hall in the largest of those organizations. They have town halls.
Mm-hmm.
In a
Mm-hmm.
company town hall in those large organizations could be several thousand people or more. In a smaller company, that just means that you have dedicated times for vision conversation where it isn't supposed to end up in the planning session, right? So like I've seen a company that only has 10 employees, all right? But they do this really well. Every 6 months, they have a conversation with all 10 employees about what it could look like in the next 2 or 3 years.
Yeah,
That's a great way of providing a platform for information that's more of a vibe conversation, that's more of a
mm-hmm.
dreaming kind of version of the conversation, that's less tied to a KPI, right?
Sure.
So then
Yeah,
when you are in a project, you provide the more formal versions of feedback. This is where surveys are important. Maybe this is where study groups in a medium-sized company happen. And in
uh-huh.
your smaller companies, that's just having what's called an after action review. After every
Sure.
project, you have your after action review to see um, how did this marketing campaign go? How did this last
Yeah,
product development session go? Like you don't have to have, a full external validated, 360 survey like you might in a larger organization.
mm-hmm.
But internally, you can have the same version of that feedback by just doing a standard same 4 or 5 questions. How did it go? How could we improve? How can we do this in a faster way next time? Do we maintain our budget? These like similar kinds of questions allow for the feedback from your employees so that when
Yeah,
the leader of the company is making decisions for long term, they're tied into the reality of what's going on in the company as opposed to staying in the high castle making decisions and only pushing direct information down.
yeah. I mean, it's interesting too because I feel like we're talking a little bit about two different things. One is tactical implementation of a project of an initiative, like whatever that may be, and the other parallel conversation is like, is this even a good idea in the first place?
Yeah.
Like, right? Is this initiative feeding our long-term goal? Which, so you're touching on so many concepts of, different frameworks, different philosophies, different books, that get at these things. So like the Vivid Vision you mentioned, that's a whole,
Mm.
if you guys haven't heard of it, it's like a book you can read that talks about the leader or the leadership team getting crystal clear on what our company is going to look like in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, down to like they get into what the business or what the building is going to be and how it's going to be designed and laid out and the space that we work in, what's going to be on the walls, what's the furniture going to look like all this kind of stuff. Super detailed, but sort of the Walt Disney imagine it first and then
Mm.
manifest that into reality kind of a thing, right? Then there's also like scaling up or the EOS philosophy of creating your BHAG, that big, hairy, audacious goal. That's not so much a smart goal with a, not a measurable, attainable goal. It's more like your vision. So I always think of something like our BHAG or our ultimate mission is to end world hunger, right? Or to eradicate poverty, or, no child goes without a meal, or that kind of stuff that's like really inspirational. And it keeps your organization pointed in the right direction, right? It functions like a North Star. It's like, we're about this thing. This is what we're trying to accomplish. We don't really feel like we're going to actually accomplish it in terms of eradicate world hunger. Like, we don't think we're going to do that, but it's going to shape every decision. Like, if this initiative doesn't help us move closer to eradicating world hunger, then we're not going to do it, right? So it serves as like guardrails. So that stuff's super helpful. I think that employees and customers or supporters or people who are going to be involved with whatever you're doing want to know that you have a clear vision like that, right? Because they can buy into that or not. They can choose, like, this is important to me and I want to be a part of it, whether it's supporting you or purchasing your stuff or working for you or whatever. Or I don't want to. I want to go, do something else. That's really helpful. But that has nothing to do with like the tactical execution of anything. That doesn't get at how we're going to do it, which then you started talking about Donald Miller and this like tactical mission statement, which I think was one of the most helpful things that I learned from him, and that whole
I
ecosystem
agree.
is like, okay, my mission statement that sounds good in, like a magazine article, like, oh, we're here to end world hunger, versus, no, by December 31st of 2026, we're going to have, new food installations in these 3 areas, and it's going to
Hmm.
be distributing this much food to this many people, you know, like that is SEAL Team 6 mission, like
Right.
what we're going to do, when we're going to do it, how we're going to do it. Now that's really important for the people involved to know, right? Like,
Right.
so
And so
where am I
like
going
that
with all
helps
this? I don't
you
know.
like
It's just
having the
like,
long term and the short term versions
mhm,
of communication and flipping back between the two of them and connecting them
making them
allows your
connected.
people to have
Yeah,
the appropriate level of feedback when it's necessary. Yeah, I
right.
have to listen more intently to the tactical SEAL Team 6 version because that's going to dictate what I do today. The long term vision is more going to be like the way that I show up at work, the
Right.
culture that we exist with, and the kinds of communication pathways like relationally that we build out versus the tactical communication lines.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I think there's the other thing I was thinking about is like one of the biggest problems that I see in organizations, and I've just seen it so many times, is the founder is typically a visionary, right? And they are the ones who imagine something that doesn't exist and start building something to move towards it. So, super important, essentially nothing can happen without that, right? Somebody has to have the idea and start to pursue it. But then what the same founder who's great at the vision and potentially like great at creating something to go that direction is also not often really good at communicating that vision very well to someone else that's going to help them accomplish it, right? So like their partners, their co-founders, but especially like then when you start to hire people who are coming in from the outside, and it's like I see this tension and this friction and frustration of like just miscommunication flat out. Not intentional. It's just it's hard for a person to articulate the vision they see in their head, especially when they're a very creative person. So I
Yeah.
think this maybe is what we're getting at, to try to put something real practical around it. Like, what kind of tools, techniques have you seen that work to help the visionary communicate well and appropriately the right things to their team to help things actually move forward?
So it's going to be counterintuitive because I'm going to say some of the best tools that I've seen for those kinds of visionary founders start with operations,
Okay.
um, because it's hard to articulate how you want things to end up if you don't set up systems to give you a baseline of operation. So many of your founders and your inventors, those people who are just radical about the thing that they want to accomplish, they're
Mm-hmm.
very detail oriented. And so they can immediately look at something and say yes or no.
Okay.
So like it's the Steve Jobs vibe, right? I'm gonna
Mm-hmm.
come in, it's all awful, start over.
Nope. Nope.
We
Nope.
don't want that. What we want is for the founder to be able to say, all right, I'm having a hard time articulating the full picture, but let's start with the building blocks of how to get there. So that's where if a founder can build a culture of, let's say, in innovation, right? So the founder has to say, this is what I mean by a culture of innovation, so that when something happens, no one's blindsided. No one's blindsided by the founder coming in on a Tuesday and saying, all right, I got a new product for us to build.
Right.
In some companies, people would freak if you came in, if a founder comes in and says, hey, I got something new to build,
Uh-huh.
because they still haven't figured out how to finish the last project. The company has to be able to have the muscle memory to be able to deal with the creative energy initially in a systematic way. All right,
Mm-hmm.
this is what do we need to download from your brain immediately about this idea, because in 4 days that idea will be gone. So let's
Yeah.
download the idea
Right.
from your brain. Let's
Replaced by a new
measure it up.
idea.
Yeah, let's measure it up
Yeah.
against our current goals. And if it fits within our current goals, we'll start working on it. And if not, we'll table it and come back.
Yeah.
That kind of systematic approach to a founder's uh, ingenuity on the regular allows them to be able
Mm-hmm.
to have a continuity of operations, right? So, and I'll be the first one to admit that I'm kind of like that. And when I had teams working with me, when I had 10 to 60 people, depending on which team I was in, there was like one person in all of the offices that I led that their job basically was to like talk me off the ledge of like redoing the whole strategy.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's the kind of vibe that sometimes I would come in with. And so you have to have the knowledge of that founder's vibe, that crazy
Mm-hmm.
person's vibe.
Mm-hmm.
But then once that founder has articulated an idea, now they're able to settle down and start to put better connectors between the new idea and the existing ideas. How does the new idea connect to what we were already doing? Because ultimately, this is why I like the word distill. The companies that have these great founders, they're actually constantly distilling that long-term vision down into actionable items. You're just it's just constant process. So some other tools that I like, Michael Hyatt has a tool called the Vision Scripter, and it's a series of questions in almost like an interview that they've put together that allows a person to go through a process of articulating a vision. He wrote a book actually called The Vision Driven Leader, and it's an even more systematic approach to downloading that vision from a founder or from a visionary. I do like the Vivid Vision. They go through the same format, gives you a placeholder to put something down on paper.
Mm-hmm.
My personal way that I like to do it is let's put together idea. Basically, it's like an idea board concept, and then match up the ideas. Like it's kind of like a scattergram, an old version of an old school scattergram. You can do it in AI tools too, where you basically have to write down a bunch of stuff. Am I inventing, or am I just pivoting on the same concept? Because a lot of times as a founder, I'm innovating on the same concepts that I've already spun up. And I haven't gotten that energy kick of trying to create something new in a while. And so my brain's like, well, let's do it again, even though it's the same product as I thought about 4 months ago.
Yeah.
So the biggest thing to do is to figure out how, as a founder, you can bring the long term and the crazy to more concrete language. That's going to be the principle that you'll find across all the tools. All of the tools are going to say it's in your head, now put it on paper. because once it's on paper, the rest of your team can start working on it with you.
For sure. It's got my wheels turning quite a bit, actually. But like the way that my mind goes with it is all about people, all about having the right. So if we're talking about a founder, like, you know, a solo founder or an individual person who is a founder, like I'm thinking about that book Rocket Fuel, that EOS is built on, like having an integrator.
Yeah.
But then I'm also thinking about Working Genius, Patrick Lencioni and the
Mhm.
whole Working Genius concept, which what they sort of dug up or figured out is that just a visionary and integrator is not enough. You also need an
Yeah.
activator. You need that middle, the
Mm.
bridge between vision and implementation. And just having the two, actually, there's too big of a gap between them typically. They have stories about that happening like at Nike in particular and other places where it's like visionary and integrator both were on the team, but there was not that middle bridge of what they call an activator. And there's just there's so many different frameworks and different philosophies that kind of all get at the same thing. Who, not how. Dan Sullivan and Benjamin Hardy, right?
Mhm. Oh yeah,
Like talking about, do
100%.
you have the right people on the bus to actually be able to go through? Because like you can put a good process in place, but if you have a whole bunch of just visionary creatives trying to execute it, you're gonna struggle because you need people with other strengths and other skills, right, to be
It's
involved.
funny you say it that way because there's got to be a lot of founders out there, people who want to be founders, who are using ChatGPT or Perplexity as their thinking partner, but they
Uh-huh.
don't have an activator, right?
Yeah.
So you've got a bunch of people
Yep.
out there who are dreaming with a AI tool, but have no idea how to turn the corner from, all right, here was my idea, here's all my documents, now what do I do?
Yeah, totally. And it would take some digging in. I mean, I guess what I'm thinking of, like what my wheels are turning on is like a mastermind group or some kind of coaching group where it's like, how do we actually put all these different concepts together into something that's usable and actionable, right? And like I'm a pretty front end ideator myself with some activation, the discernment, well, using Working Genius language, right? Wonder and
Yeah.
discernment. You're like a wonder inventor, right? So
Yep.
we
Invention and
function
wonder
at
are
the
my
front
two
end of the
fronts.
process primarily, which is good and bad, right? You need that, but then you need people who are like can get down into the more of the like distill this out. That is a great word that you brought up into what's actually practical, what's actually useful. First of all, like, is this even a
Mhm.
good
Mhm.
idea? And you know what? I think that it's not always even is this a good idea? It's like, is this a good and helpful idea right now? Or does this need to
Yes.
be,
Yes.
tabled for 6 months and we come back around to it? Because it probably is a good idea or potentially is a good idea, but we're like neck deep in the middle of implementing your last idea. And we actually need to follow through and finish this before we start on something else. This is something that I've lived this one firsthand with my own endeavors and with clients. Like the founder coming in and like you were saying, their energy is to create. And so they'll start creating something new, but it's really counterproductive because it's too early. Or it undermines the thing we were already working on. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like
Because,
it's
well, I
like,
mean,
wow,
just
it's the
even very
team can't even keep
practically,
up,
you'll
it's
find
like
people
whiplash.
who, yeah. Well, like even very practically, as an example, I think the fear of missing out from a business perspective says you got to have all the social media accounts right now
Mm,
instead of let me figure out Facebook. Okay, well, if I figured out Facebook, it's only two shades away from understanding Instagram. If I understand those two, now I can move into YouTube, and then I can go to LinkedIn or whatever formula you're going to take, whichever order, instead of like, oh, I got to open up 100 social media accounts and start publishing to
yeah.
all of them immediately. Well,
Yeah.
that's a great idea, but going 0 to 100, there's going to be some bumps along the way, and you may end up looking worse before you look better. So,
Totally.
like this is where the founder has to have, like you said, I like the idea of the group. In fact, this is a great way for your your what do you call it? Accelerator.
The
Your
accelerator.
accelerator
Yeah.
is a good version of that because it's like,
Yeah.
all right, so
Yeah.
let's get someone like Matt and Nan to say, not yet.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like, let's work on the most important stuff first. Like, do you have a product? Do you have an
100%.
offer? Like, if you don't have those things, we don't have an email campaign. So it's like,
That's
like
very true. Yeah. Yep.
like you
Yep.
sometimes you just got to start somewhere, and that, like you said, building the who not how. Sometimes outsourcing or contracting or partnering is the best way
Yeah.
of moving forward, because you're not having to learn a new skill. This is something that I'm learning right now with
Yeah.
like uh, getting booked to speak at um, conferences or on podcasts and stuff. Like, there's a whole skill of being a speaker agent, and I don't have it currently.
Yeah.
Like, I don't have that skill, and it's like, what would be better for me to hire someone to do that, or for me to learn that new skill? No, I'm going to hire someone, because learning that new skill is going to take me away from doing the thing that I want to do eventually anyway. So
Yeah.
it's exactly a who not how conversation, and it's a capacity conversation too.
Man, you're touching on a couple of things there that are like close to our heart. At Free Flow CEO, when we a couple of years ago when we first got going, we had clients who were a lot like you, who were kind of thought leaders, author, speaker types, and we took on that role of being sort of their agent to book gigs, and we found that we were way in over our head. It was just like a whole different world that we weren't very familiar with, and well, we can do general marketing things, like what they needed was someone with specific knowledge of that facet of the industry, of getting booked in those type of situations. So we didn't do that for very long. Um, but also, oh, what was the other thing you were talking about that just made so much sense? Oh, just the idea of like not trying to do everything all at once, right?
Mm,
Like deciding what you think is going to make the most sense, and then committing to it for a little while and sticking with it until you have at least some measurable data that you can
mm,
decide, like, is this a good, and I'm thinking like marketing channels is, a good example of this. Like, is this a good channel for us? Like, is Facebook really where our audience is at? Um, or is it Instagram? Because even those are both meta, they're two different, at least, they're not exactly the same audience. And the
right.
content I'm creating, we've been learning this firsthand. And, Gary Vee and a lot of other people talk about this, but like each platform has its own type of content that it wants. Like the audiences of TikTok and Instagram and Facebook are all different, and LinkedIn way different. Like what you put on there
Right.
plays totally differently. So you can't just make one thing and like post it everywhere and expect it to do well. But that's a little bit more of a rabbit trail, like a deeper dive conversation. The general idea of we've kind of gone a lot of different places in this conversation, which I think is good. It's almost like
We're good at that.
we're setting the stage for several different things we could go deeper into.
Yeah.
But the the main idea of like just not trying to do too many things all at once, and as a founder or a
Mm,
leadership team, not just like constantly throwing new things out there at the team, but like actually going through a process and being systematic about it, like you were saying, to decide what is it that's most important right now. And the whole quarterly thing is good. Like Full Focus does that. Most of these systems, a quarter, like a 90-day period, is a great period of time to set an objective and a priority, and then execute on that, right? Like follow
right.
through, like stay with it for 3 whole months, and then measure it at the end of 3 months. At least give yourself that long to see if what you're doing was working and moving the needle, and then start to make pivots or iterations or adjustments as needed. But um, yeah, yeah, there's just so many things. It's like if it's not systematic in some way, you're just throwing stuff against the wall constantly and
Right.
reevaluating constantly, but not really getting meaningful data to measure.
This is like where short-sighted employees can get they can get stuck right, with a company where um, they're short-sighted because they're only able to see so far into the future, and the leader of the company saying, "Trust me, I actually do have a plan, for
Hmm.
2 years down the road. We're just not able to work on it yet, but it's the 2-year plan is dependent on the next 90-day plan, and so we have to crush our next 90 so that
Yep.
we can get to the next 2 years." And that's where I think, like, full circle, your communication from a leader's perspective has to be able to connect those dots.
Yeah.
If we don't crush the next 90, we are not even able to tackle the next year. But if we can get the next year done, now we're taking those steps towards our vision of the next 15. And it's tough for a small company to do this, because there's so many variables that can change the effectiveness of a plan. Industry changes, your culture, your community might change. Sometimes
Hmm.
one key employee coming or going can make a huge difference in a company. But that's where you have to,
For
as the
sure.
founder, you have to hold things in a more, like, loose and strategic way to say, all right, so if this happens, the formula says I got to do this, instead of scrapping it and starting all over, because you just never get anywhere if you scrap it and start over, and it really frustrates
Right.
people who are not long-term minded if you do that, because they go, man, I just bent over backwards for the past 6 months, and we're going to start over.
Yeah.
And that they're not wanting to work hard for you for the next six
No,
months now.
people do not appreciate that. Yeah. Yeah. Man, it's tough. It's like the balance of long-term vision, short-term execution, and like sticking with something long enough to see it through, but also not staying with something that's not working for too long and not just like, beating your head against the ground to try to make something work that's just not going to work. It's all, man, it's all a very fine line. That's
It
what
is,
makes
and
it
that's
hard, I
where,
guess.
like, it
Is why.
is leadership is a balancing act.
Yeah.
Like, marketing, accounting, I mean, the public relations version of your company, like, so many things can derail a plan. And so that's why, like, I
Hmm.
prefer to make a vision. So, like, I think the vivid vision sometimes might go a little too far, because I think if you get hung up on any of those details,
Yeah.
like, are you going to be frustrated? Like, what's going to be the problem with that? So I
Yeah.
think that's better. I teach my clients, their vision needs to be specific enough to motivate them on the daily. Not motivation as in, like, a bright yellow flame, but as in, like, the hot coals kind of motivation, right? Like, that keeps it
Hmm.
burning. Like, how can we be disciplined to get towards our vision? And that's where those operations come in key. And then you got to build in your checkpoints to say, all right, is this working? Because if it's not, our vision is the same. We just need to adjust the course of how we're going to get there.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a couple of good analogies for that, like the whole trellis and vine. You build the trellis out of wood. It's a rigid structure, relatively rigid, and but then the vine grows in it, and it kind of goes. You don't know exactly where it's going to go. It follows the
Right.
cur the
Right.
path of least resistance or the correct path. Or another way that using the coach builder and Donna Miller stuff is the airplane, right? You chart a flight plan and you have a takeoff, an origination and a destination and a time that you're leaving and a time you plan to arrive, but then there's weather and unpredictable stuff, so sometimes you make adjustments as you're going, but the end goal is still the same, like you're going to the same place, right?
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
ideally aren't landing in San Francisco if you're trying to get to LA. People are not going to be too happy about that.
Right.
Right? So yeah, like you said, it's a balancing act. I think that's a good way to look at it. I think we got a
And
lot
it
of
and it takes
material
time.
here. What's that?
It just takes time. It
Oh yeah,
takes
yeah,
it takes
yeah.
repetition.
Oh right, yeah. You can't just like snap your fingers and make it happen. Yeah. Well, I think that's a good place to land it. I feel like what we've done is maybe like opened up more conversations than like more questions than answers, but that's okay. Like that's kind of how it goes. Um, yeah, this is one where I don't know, for people who do end up listening to this, I'd love to hear feedback, like questions this brings up, um, experiences that you've had, how you've handled this and seen it work, things that haven't worked, good learning experiences there. But anyway, if this is, speaking to you or resonating with you at all, then we'd love to get your feedback. You can find us here, Free Flow CEO Show. Jonathan, remind us where people can find you or connect with you.
Yeah, I hang out on LinkedIn pretty much every day. So find me at Jonathan Shealy on LinkedIn, or you can go to my website, shealyexecutiveconsulting.co, and we can get a call scheduled, and we'll figure out where you want to take your company.
Yeah, we can dive into it further. Nice. Well, thanks for being here, man. Thanks for your time. Good conversation as always.
Yeah,
And thanks for
my
being
pleasure.
here. Yeah, if you're listening and tuning in, thanks for being here, and we will see you next time.